In this video, what I'm going to do is show you some adjustments you can do to this image to kind of just put the finishing touches on. And we may or may not keep them all. We might not actually use them, but I want to show you a lot of the things that I do on a pretty regular basis so that you can choose whether you want to use them or not. Okay, so I showed you adjustment layers already. New adjustment layer. First thing we'll probably do is curves. And here you can, it's showing this gray roller coaster in the back is your histogram, and it shows all that represents a graph of all the pixels in your scene. And furthest left are black pixels, furthest right are white pixels, and then the height determines how many of those pixels there are in your scene. So in my middle gray area there's a certain amount of pixels there, and what I'm doing with this line is pushing the pixels that are in that middle gray up to be more white or down to be more black. So what you can do to add a little more contrast is just push your blacks a little darker, push your whites a little lighter, and you can see that makes a lot of contrast on, off. That really ups the contrast quite a bit. Then you can kind of fine-tune by just turning down the opacity of that. So like right there is pretty good. So that's one thing we can do. We can also go in here and adjust it by channel. So just the reds, and you'll see what this does. This kind of makes things change color a bit, because now just my red pixels are being adjusted. And there's no formula to this other than to just find something you like or just mess with it until it looks good. And you always have that dilemma of, oh, I wonder if it would look better if I do this or maybe that. And it's just up to your personal preference what you want to see. So I don't like what I did on the channels, so I'm gonna just forget about that. And let's just take the RGB back, or something like that. That's doing all channels at once. So that's not bad for the curves. You can also do a layer adjustment, color balance. If you go into the highlights, we could make them more yellowy red, just warmer, and then the shadows could be cooler, maybe like that. I don't know, I kind of like that. Getting a little too much contrast now, so maybe I'll turn off that curves. The cool thing about this is if you like the curves in one place but not in another, you can turn it off using masks again. So make sure you've got a mask there. It's on by default. Then select the mask and you can just paint black on that mask on this tree. Maybe on this tree if you don't want it there. Turn my opacity up. Okay, so that's kind of the value of masks. They're really great for compositing stuff. So I actually want to try and fix that tree a little bit because it's so dark. It's like the darkest thing in my scene. Part of that's because I had to change the materials and make them much simpler. But if that tree looked a little more like that, it'd be good. So what we can do is just take this mask and fill it with all black. Select the mask, fill with black, and then go back with a white brush and only paint where this tree is. It's a pretty sloppy way to do this. You could go back and render out a mask for it and it would be better. But you can see how contrasty these leaves got. I don't like how heavy they look in the scene. That's a little better, I guess. And the other place I wanted a little more light is up in that raft and the soffit area. So I think that looks a little better too. So that's on and off, on and off. And I do that frequently just to make sure I like what I'm doing and all that. So the power of masks, you can see already that you can selectively make adjustments, and that's why I use layer adjustments instead of image adjustments. So layer, new adjustment. What else can we do here? That's probably good for the adjustment layers. Other things we can do is like color overlays. If you create a new layer that's just blank, and say you want this to be a little more warm in here, so you could get a nice warm color. Something like that is kind of good for sunlight. And you can take and color some areas just pretty loosely where the sun's hitting directly, maybe. Definitely over there, right there. You get some of these branches. Those ones actually might not work. But then if you change it to overlay, you can see how that's really warming up those areas. So that's too much, obviously, but we can turn it down. Maybe somewhere right there is nice if you prefer. And then in the shadows you could do the opposite, so the complementary color to this, something like a deep blue, something that kind of resembles the sky. And this can give some nice color balances in your scene. Maybe in there we want some more blue. That's way too much, obviously, but yeah, that's alright. You could even do something like this. Something I do fairly frequently is take that warm color again and go to your gradients tool. Make sure up here you're going from just the color to nothing. That one right there. And just do something like this on a new blank layer. You can just overlay it. You can see how that kind of makes it look like the sun is glowing, almost like a lens flare coming in from that side. And then you could do the opposite, the complementary color coming in from the other side on a brand new layer again. Kind of cooler over here on this side of the image, and that's kind of exaggerated, obviously, but I don't know, it could be pleasing to the eye. It's up to personal preference. You might like it like that. One thing I didn't show you is these other channels we have. So we have the reflection channel. If we bring it up to the top, that's not going to work well, but if you put that to linear dodge or add, then it just adds it on top of itself. So that's basically doubling the reflection we had on all our objects. So sometimes you might want that. In this scene I don't. The refraction pass, which is here, show you some things you could do with that. Now if I added that to itself, then you can see inside better there. Now if you took a new layer adjustment, and took hue saturation and affect only this refraction layer, and go into there and hit colorize, make it real saturated, and let's make it like a warm color, something like that, as if there's lights on inside. I don't know if this will work on this scene, but on more dimly lit scenes it will. I just collapsed that hue saturation layer with the refraction pass by hitting Control E. But let's try and copy it a couple more times. Yeah, see, it's not really working here. But if this was a more dimly lit scene, like a dusk scene or something, you could make it look like there's lights on inside. That's kind of a cheap way to fake it. And you can maybe blur it so it looks glowy, as if this was a night scene. So just having those extra passes just gives you a little more control over things. I'm not going to keep that because it doesn't work for this scene, but I do that occasionally when I'm trying to make night scenes. Or you can of course just model what's inside and put real lights in there instead of faking it in Photoshop later. Overall, I think this scene's looking pretty cool. One thing we can do is maybe add some, let's go to new adjustment layer, levels, and add some vignetting from the camera in. So if we take, maybe if we just do that right there, that's just sliding our middle black over. And what I'm going to do now is mask that out for everything, but then paint it back in some places. When you take pictures with a real camera, it sometimes makes the edges darker because of the shape of the lens and things like that and how much light it's letting in. So we can kind of recreate that by creating a mask like that. And what that does too is kind of draw your eye to the center of the image where we have our house. And then we can, the last thing we will do here is sharpen the image. Now remember I told you Control-Alt-Shift-E, all those buttons together, will make a copy of all these layers and put it onto its own layer. If we put that on soft light blending mode, and these blending modes, I can't go through what all these do, but you've seen the ones I use frequently, and you just need to kind of play with them and use trial and error to figure out what you like with them, because they all do slightly different things. But I'm using soft light here, and that basically adds contrast to the whole scene, which looks kind of nice. Then you can go to Filter, Other, High Pass, and this is just a sharpening technique. All it's doing is sharpening the image. Now in real time you can see there how it's going to affect your image. So there it's like really sharp, way too sharp. I don't know though, that kind of looks nice. I would turn it down, and then so this high pass thing, this is just a technique for sharpening. There's other ways to sharpen too. This is my preferred way, using a soft light layer on top of the image and then doing high pass on it. So I actually kind of like that a little bit, but you don't want to go overboard with your sharpening. So let's turn it down a bit too. That's always a good way to fine tune. And then maybe you could even make it only sharp in the middle and mask out the edges so that they're not so sharp, so that again your eye is drawn to the center. And I think that's pretty darn nice. I think that's a pretty good image for a beginner class. I mean, we showed you the modeling, we showed you the textures, showed you how to Photoshop, do some basic Photoshop stuff. Again, that can and will be an entire class unto its own, but there you have it. I think that's a pretty good image, and hopefully you've enjoyed following along with me to this point, and you're liking the results that you're getting.